Welcome to the life of Van Gogh. Tortured talent. The genius and the angst of an expressionist master. Vincent van Gogh's story is one of the most ironic in art history. Today, he is celebrated the world over as one of the most important painters of all time, recognized with sellout shows, faded museums, and record prices of tens of millions of dollars at auction. Yet as he was painting the canvases that would subsequently become these sellout modern masterpieces, Van Gogh was battling not only the disinterest of his contemporary audiences but also devastating bouts of mental illness, with episodes of depression and paralyzing anxiety, which would eventually claim his life in 1890, when he committed suicide shortly after his 37th birthday. This comprehensive story of Vincent van Gogh, 1853 to 1890, pairs a detailed monograph on his life and art. Let us dive into the detailed life of this artist par excellence. We will explore the nostalgic, melancholy, meaningful, poignant life of Vincent van Gogh. Two chairs, each of them dominating the painting it appears in. Positioned at an angle, touching the edges of the canvas, they have a monumental quality, and seem to be saying, "Go ahead, sit down." Both chairs are unoccupied. There are only one or two objects on them, waiting to be removed or picked up by the person they belong to. Both of these chairs dominate the pictures, filling the painted space, solid, palpable, yet they are intensely related to each other, too, like two panels of a diptych that achieve new unity in being brought together. Juxtaposed, the chairs will be looking at each other, as it were, offering an invitation to talk, to confide, or else, back to back, they will have turned away from each other, as if they had nothing more to say and existed in different worlds. Now, at any rate, wrote Vincent van Gogh to his brother Theo. Letter 563, in December 1888, when he painted the two chairs, "I can tell you that the latest two studies are most remarkable. One chair made of wood and extremely yellow wicker, up against the wall, on red tiles, by daylight. Then Gauguin's armchair, red and green, a nocturnal mood, the wall and floor similarly red and green, two novels and a candle on the seat. On canvas, the paint thickly applied." The curious subjects Van Gogh was taking were furniture in his house at Arles and represented the daily meeting place of Van Gogh and his guest, Paul Gauguin. The two painters would sit talking about art and the affairs of the world, debating, quarreling, till things went up in their faces. Gauguin's sojourn was to be inseparably linked to the nervous breakdown from which Van Gogh was never fully to recover. A few days before we parted, Van Gogh subsequently wrote to A.E. Aurier, letter 626a, describing the nocturnal painting of Gauguin's chair. "Before illness forced me to enter a home, I tried to paint his empty chair." The two paintings are his statement of the friendship of two artists. His own chair, simple and none too comfortable, with his dearly loved pipe lying on it, stands for the artist himself. It is meant just as metaphorically as the more elegant, comfortable armchair where Gauguin liked to settle. Everyday things, purely functional objects, acquire symbolic power. Van Gogh's unoccupied chairs pay respect to a tendency to avoid representation of the human figure. Gauguin is there, seated in his armchair, even if we cannot see him. The break in the two artists' friendship had become inevitable. When Gauguin decided to leave, he left the ruins of Van Gogh's dreams of an artist's community. As you know, I have always considered it idiotic that painters live alone. It is always a loss if one is left to one's own devices, Van Gogh had written to his brother, describing his longing for solidarity amongst painters. When he lost Gauguin, he also lost his overall perspective on life. Thus we must see the two chairs as facing away from each other, expressing the irreconcilability of day and night, a polarity Van Gogh establishes in the very colors used in the paintings. Empty chairs had been a feature of Van Gogh's thinking since childhood. The memories that crowd behind this single image are connected with deep mournfulness, with thoughts of the omnipresence of death. After I had seen Pa off at the station, and had watched the train as long as it, or even only its smoke, was still in sight, and after I had returned to my room and Pa's chair was still drawn up to the table where the books and periodicals still lay from the day before, I felt as miserable as a child, even though I am well aware that we shall soon be seeing each other again. Van Gogh's life's work as an artist remains ambivalent to a degree that has not yet been fully recognized. His paintings are notable for their immediacy, their sensuous impact. They draw their power from the painter's affectionate openness towards all things, towards man and nature. Still, The pleasure that he takes in a veritably naive identification with the world is continually overshadowed by profound eschatological intuitions, by apprehensions of transience and death. The hand that reaches out tenderly is retracted at the last moment because it has too often been hurt. There can be no doubt that Van Gogh learnt from experience. Indeed, his life precluded him taking a straight and simple course. Yet Van Gogh naturally remained a child of his age. He grew up in a century when people for the first time saw their own existence as everything, with no transcendental support system, a century that produced many odd and even self-destructive characters. Zadelmeyer writes, "It must be added that the artists have been among those who suffered the most in the 19th and 20th centuries, the very people whose task it has been to render the fall of man and of his world visible in their terrible visions. In the 19th century there was an altogether new type of suffering artist, the lonely, lost, despairing artist on the brink of insanity. It was a type that previously only occurred in isolated instances, if that. The 19th century artists, great and profound minds, often have the character of sacrificial victims, of victims who sacrifice themselves." From Hölderlin, Goya, Friedrich, Runge and Kleist through Daumier, Stifter, Nietzsche and Dostoevsky to Van Gogh, Strindberg and Trakl, there was a line of solidarity and suffering at the hands of the times. All of them suffered from the fact that God was remote, and dead, and man debased. Van Gogh's chairs constitute a metaphor of the crisis of the entire century, a metaphor that corresponds to the somewhat forced pathos of Zadelmeyer's account. Van Gogh's ailment was the maladie du siècle, the self-fulfilling Weltschmerz, that Zadelmeyer attempts to explain by the loss of belief in God. Thus it is only consistent if we write the history of Van Gogh's art and life, less in a personal than in a historical sense. The causes for his failure in life, and for the subsequent rapid, all the more rapid, success of his cultural counterworld, need not be sought in the untouchable torments of a solitary visionary. Quite the contrary, the reason lies in Van Gogh's tireless ambition for recognition, even if only in the image society had fashioned and could accept, the image of the outsider, the isolated genius. If ever there was a genius against his own will, it was Vincent van Gogh. Please do subscribe to join us in the life journey of the finest artist mankind has ever witnessed.